Welcome to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast,
Supercharged by Amped Outdoors Lithium.
Today, anglers fish longer. Today, anglers fish harder. Today, anglers rely more than ever on their electronics. It all comes down to catching more fish, and today, anglers rely on Amped Outdoors lithium batteries, period.
catch more fish,
Learn tips, tricks,
techniques, and secrets, and decades of angler's wisdom. Welcome to the show.
Oh, yeah! Yeah! Oh! Oh, that's a nice one. Yeah!
Good evening, everybody. It looks like Chuck's having a little bit of difficulty. It's Philly D. Chuck, it looks like you're muted.
Hey.
There we go.
Yeah, you
Yes.
just had to unmute my mic. I don't know why it was muted.
I couldn't do it on my side, my brother. My bad. I'm back in my cubby.
Weird. Anyways, that's how it's been for the last 2 weeks. Just one technical challenge after another. But I think we got everything figured out. I got a really good show for you guys. And I have my computer. Why is it acting weird? All right. So if you've ever wondered what separates the average angler from the legend, tonight's your answer. Our guest just isn't a captain. He's a teacher, a technician, and a Lake Erie lifter with a smallmouth obsession that runs deeper than most will ever know. Please welcome to the show the founder of Shoemaker Outdoors and the man who's cracked the code on trophy Great Lakes, Lake Erie smallmouth, Johnathan Shoemaker. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Chuck.
How you doing, brother? Can you
Good.
hear me okay?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Sounds like everything worked great on your end, so that's awesome. So
I'm blessed to have a wife who's a very IT proficient, so it was a breeze for her. I just sat here and let her handle the business.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes a difference.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we get started? Just introduce yourself to the audience. Just kind of tell people a little bit of quick background information for you.
Okay. My name's Captain Johnathan Shoemaker. I run Shoemaker Outdoors Charters. I've been doing that this is my 6th year now. Before that, I was a professional fisherman and fully sponsored, and I fished the National Walleye Tour with I fished the FLW Walleye Tour for years as a co-angler, then worked my way up to being a professional and getting sponsored and getting a new boat. I was with G3 Boats for 12 years, and they were a great sponsor of mine. And after the '08 recession, the FLW Walleye Tour fell apart, and I still wanted to tournament fish, and the bass fishing was still happening. So I kind of transitioned over to fishing as an amateur or co-angler and learned a lot of things, traveled around, got to fish. That's the one thing about the tournament fishing, whether you're bass fishing, walleye fishing, you're fishing some of the best lakes all across America. I fished from the Dakotas down to the Florida, and I've been blessed to see a lot of awesome water, to be honest with you. Let's see, in a real quick story here for people who think fishing and tournament fishing is easy and everything. I was doing it as an amateur for 4 or 5 years, and I wanted to be a pro, and I got my own boat. And I was planning fully on paying my entire way through the tour and just hoping and praying. And I put out a bunch of paperwork out there, business proposals, trying to find a sponsor. And I wasn't really getting a whole lot of good feedback. And I'm thinking that, this is going to probably cost me $25,000 out of my pocket to fish my rookie year. And I'm at work one day, I'm a bail bondsman, and my phone rang. I can remember it was 1 month before the season started. And some guy says, "Are you Johnathan Shoemaker?" I said, "Yep." He says, "How would you like to be fully sponsored in your rookie year on the FLW Walleye Tour?" And I said, "Sure. Who's this?" That type of stuff is just, I was in the right spot at the right time. He saw one of my proposals, and that's how I ended up with G3 Boats. But it was a lot of work and a lot of time and effort for them just to be able to see something like that, and a lot of time fishing as an amateur. But when the door was open, I was ready to beat it down, and it kind of grew from there, really, and now that the walleye, it's not a real lucrative sport on the walleye side anymore. And so it's much easier for me just to stay home and get paid to take people out on Lake Erie. About half my trips are for walleye and half my trips are for bass. Now, I'm known as being the bass guy just because there's only so many bass charters out there that people respect and would trust their friends to as a reference. Plus that I have a good reputation to make sure that I put people on fish, make sure they have a lot of fun for the day. And, I try to work as hard as I can every day to make sure people have the trip of their life, because people spend a lot of money to come up to Lake Erie to fish. And, they might be saving all year long just so they can come up and fish with me. So I put that on myself and a lot of pressure of, I want to make sure every trip is great. I don't want to take you out there and be like, "Oh, the fish weren't biting today, boys. Sorry." And it happens every once in a great while. But this year actually for walleye has been a little bit tougher. I've talked to some other captains who feel the same way. It's been a little bit hit and miss. When you can get them, we crushed them the other day, but there's been some real tough bites out here. But for the next month or so, I got a lot of bass trips planned, and I'm excited about it because they're a lot more fun in my eyes running them as a captain, running smallmouth. Because when you set the hook on a 4-pound smallmouth on light drag, and that thing jumps out of the water, and it's so much more fun than trolling for walleye per se.
Yeah, I agree. And there really isn't a whole lot of offerings when it comes to charter captains around smallmouth, because it is the walleye capital of the world, right? And it was funny, I sent your business profile, your Facebook business profile, to my buddy earlier, and or yesterday, and because he's a smallmouth guy, and the picture that pops up's a walleye, and I laughed and I joked with him. I told him, Jonathan's a smallmouth guy, but it's the walleye capital of the world, so you got to give people what they want, right? So
that's my root. That's my root. But I'm finding out that my niche in charter, because there's 500 walleye charters out here, I'm finding out my niche where I can really separate myself is definitely the smallmouth. And I'm okay with that. It took me a couple of years to figure that out, but yeah, I actually enjoy it more. It's a lot more work for me, man. It is a lot more work for me to run a smallmouth charter. I run a lot of distance. Half my trips, I take people up into Canadian waters and, tying leaders and everything. And then I spend a lot of money, a lot more money on those because of plastics and terminal tackle that you're breaking off versus running the same 6 bandits on walleye charter for a week straight. It's a lot more complex, but it's also when your clients catch what they say is their biggest smallmouth ever, and I hear that quite a lot, it's a very rewarding moment for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. I always say I do it for the smiles, just like you. It's not, you don't become a fishing charter to become rich, right?
No,
Hopefully you start
nobody's
off
breaking
rich
the bank
because you'll,
doing that except for maybe 1 or 2 guys on Lake Erie. Everybody else is making money, but nothing that's making anybody rich. That's for sure.
right? It just basically gives you the opportunity to provide this experience, and like you said, when a client tells you something like that about the day that you just provided them on a fishing adventure, I don't think you could put a value on that.
It's the family ones too that are the best. When a dad comes with his son from Tennessee, or the dad, wife, and son fish together. Those family charters are awesome. I love having the guys, the buddies on a bachelor party. That's fun too. But yeah, it's the family pictures that are the best.
Absolutely. Especially the young kids and the father son, or mother daughter, mother son, those kind of trips. There's nothing better.
That girl right there that you just showed a picture of, the blonde one back, that girl there on the left is probably one of the hardest fishermen that I've ever met. She fishes, I wouldn't doubt if she fishes 100 days a year. And like when it was still ice up here, she lives down by Cincinnati, and she was fishing little streams and stuff, catching 10-inch smallmouth, and happy as heck. She travels all over to go fishing, and she's a great client, and yeah, she loves her fishing, no doubt.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I've noticed on the lady angler side of things, they kind of have an upper edge on us. Seems like they're a little bit quicker to figure out those patterns and figure out the techniques and stuff. It's pretty interesting.
I will tell you that there's 2 things that are very common every time women are on my boat. And I don't care if it's a walleye charter or a smallmouth charter. Okay. Number 1 is they follow directions. Okay. When I tell someone this is how you need to do it, whatever it is, and I look over and they're doing it exactly how I explained, versus because they just want to do it right and they're not familiar with it a lot of times. So they just want to do exactly what you told them, versus a man's like, I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. And every boat's different and every boat has its own system. And sometimes when you think you know what you're doing, you kind of mess stuff up, And secondly, it's very common that the woman will catch the largest fish of the day too. I don't know why it is, but I mean, I can't tell you how many times the woman on the boat caught the largest fish of the day. It happens a lot.
Yeah, it's bragging rights, and I don't know, it might really come down to that ego thing, because it's not intentional, but sometimes people let that ego get in the way, and they have that impression of, like, I've been fishing for 40 years, you're not going to teach me anything. Like I had an older gentleman, he's been out a few times, great guy, but up in age, and he's kind of has some issues. So him and his son come out, and that's his approach, is like, nope, I've been fishing for 40 years, and you just kind of got to let them do their thing, but on the flip side, with the lady anglers, and something that we can all take lessons from is, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? Sometimes just shut up and listen, and pay attention. You might learn something. But if you automatically think that you know everything, you're not going to learn anything.
Well, I find for the women that philosophy is great on the boat, but as soon as they step on land, then maybe that philosophy changes a little bit. I'm just saying, Maybe it's not similar for everybody else, but I've seen that. That's a joke, ladies. Okay.
I agree, you know, and I'll agree with you because I am not married, fortunately.
Okay.
So,
hey,
no
Chuck,
consequences for
let's
me.
get into the nitty gritty here of what kind of baits I'm throwing right now, and what kind of transitions and where we're at in fishing for smallmouth right now, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let me skip over here and so why don't we start with this time of year? What's the best approach when you're going to a new location or maybe somewhere in the Western Basin? What's the best approach to locate the fish, first of all?
Okay, so if you saw my Lowrance map and you saw the structure that I have marked from Avon Point down to west of Catawba and around every island out there, you would be amazed. I mean, we're talking thousands of waypoints, right? And those waypoints, I just wasn't randomly looking at the map and marking spots. No, every one of those waypoints is a spot that I've gone over, and most of the time intentionally not fishing. Okay, people don't understand how much work I put in to find smallmouth by just driving around for hours and hours and hours. There'll be days where I don't even bring a fishing rod on the boat, Chuck. Okay, because I just let my graph work, and I watch a lot of side imaging because I'm looking for different changes from whether it goes from gravel to big boulders, or the other day I found a really nice spot on Kelly's where it was gravelly and rock, but there was these cuts in that was I knew it was sand. Okay, well, guess what? We're getting near the spawn right now. So what'll happen is those smallmouth will go up into those little cuts and fan out that sand right down to the next level of the rock right there. And I knew that would be an awesome spot for another 2 weeks or so when we get a full moon, because smallmouth will spawn around the full moon, like a lot of fish do, honestly. And right now we're at like 55-degree water temperature, give or take, depending on what day it is. And so we're looking at 2.5 weeks or so, and fish will be really migrating towards shallow water and spawning areas. And you're thinking of spawning bass and on ponds, you're thinking of 1, 2, 3 foot of water for largemouth. Well, these fish are 8 foot down, give or take. You need some clean water to be able to see them on beds. I think the shallow, I mean, I have a couple of areas where I can find them in 2, 3 foot of water, but most of the best beds, the bigger fish, are actually 8 to 10 foot. And they actually have a tool. It's called a flogger. It's a cone with handles on the side, and there's glass in the bottom of it where you can look over the edge of your boat into the flogger and look down in deeper water than you would with just your eyes and see beds down there. That's used a lot in tournaments. I don't actually use that for a charter per se, but yeah, 8 to 10 foot of water is usually a target zone for some of the bigger, better beds, but we're getting before that now. Right now, we're in a pre-spawn mode, and really solid pre-spawn. And what I mean by that is most of the fish have exited their deep winter haunts now, and they're somewhere fairly close, within a mile or two, which they can make up in a day if they wanted to. And they're sitting in, say, 10 to 18, 20 foot of water right now, which makes them a great target for a swim bait. Okay. I use 2 different types of swim baits. They're both made by Kitech. The first one I use is a Swing Impact Fat Kitech. And then the second one I use is also, that one was a 3.3 inch. And this one is a 3.5 inch. This is their Easy Shiner version here. Both of them, I don't try to go crazy with an all green pumpkin or all fluorescent color. I just try to stick to the natural, something that has a gray body and a blue black back to it, and 3/8 ounce jig head. And it can be just a plain lead head jig head, nothing painted. It doesn't have to be fancy. They got tungsten jig heads that'll cost you a fortune. You don't need that. You can buy a pack of 30 for cheap, and you slide one of them suckers on, cast it out there, and it's literally the slowest you can reel that sucker is what you want to do right now, where it's just barely ticking the bottom. And if you're not ticking the bottom, you're not in the strike zone. But if you're ticking the bottom, all of a sudden one of those ticks turns into a rod bend and you're hooked up. And this is a great time to catch one of the biggest smallmouth you'll ever catch, because she's pre-spawn and hasn't dropped her eggs yet, you know. Right place at right time, of course. And the problem with this time of year more than anything, we've had so much wind out there on Lake Erie lately. The water's all stirred up, and smallmouth are visual feeders. So you really need them to be able to see what they're, you know, they're not smelling their way to your food. So clear water is essential, and it's limiting right now where if I went tomorrow where I could take my clients, there's only a couple of different areas that I would trust would have the clean enough water to catch smallmouth, you know. So not only do we need less rain and water turbidity, but we also need some calmer winds just to let the water clear up. So the one other thing, pre-spawn, then I'll let you jump in here, is this was a lot of fun. I fished the last time I went out. This is a Megabass 110 +1 junior. Okay, that's what this is here. This is in Tennessee shad. It's got a little gold green on the back. And this is got a little bigger build than the normal Megabass diver, but it's a little smaller. That's why they call it the junior. But that was a lot of fun. That thing dives about 8 foot down. And when you're over about 10 foot of water or so, and you're looking on your live scope and you cast out there and you're watching your bait, and all of a sudden that big red orange blob comes in right behind it, and you can let that bait literally just, it'll sit there. It won't sink, it won't float, it'll just sit there. And I had one the other day that sat there for about 7-8 seconds before a fish finally decided, yeah, I'm gonna eat that, and swiped at it. So that's another really fun way to fish for them in the spring at this time of year.
Right. You know, one question I had, you had mentioned that they're not smelling their way to your bait. So I'm assuming you're not really focusing on any kind of scents or anything like that to kind of put icing on the cake.
So I'm not going to say scent doesn't play a role, because it does at certain times of year. And the proof I have of that is that some charters will fish. I'm pretty much a plastics charter. I don't run hardly any live bait at all. But some charters, the big white boats out there by the islands, they'll run soft craws, which is just a mini crayfish about this big. And once those things get in the water and they start getting crunched on by fish, there's some type of scent attracted to those. And anybody fishing around them isn't going to catch anything, but that boat will just load the boat with smallmouth sometimes. So I know scent does play a role with it. I'm not denying that at all, but their primary scent, or their primary sense that they use, is definitely visual. And it's always going to be that way for them. I'm not saying that once they key in on your bait and you're letting it sit there, that scent doesn't play a role, because it does. And I'll explain that a little further when we get to the drop shot. And I'm talking about that here in just a minute. Okay. Yeah, it does play a role, but sight rules the day for smallmouth first and foremost.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so if you'd like to keep going, you're kind of on a roll. I'll just let you keep going.
I've never been told that I can't fill airtime, buddy. Okay, I can do that. So, okay, we're going to transition then right now. Okay, we just went pre-spawn and what I like to throw, which is swim baits, 3/8 ounce jig, or a Megabass, right? But as soon as that spawn starts, then I'm throwing a little Ned rig, which is a little 1/4 ounce weight and a little chunk. It looks like a floating worm. It sticks its butt up in the air. Looks like a Senko cut in half, basically. It's really a do nothing bait, but it's easy to get down into a bed and for the bass to snatch up and not just get like the tentacles off of another bait or the tail. They usually get the whole thing if they bite it. You know, and that's what I'm throwing during the spawn. If I'm trying to actually target fish on the bed. And I'll remind people, take a picture and let that fish right back in the water as soon as possible, because you will watch it. It'll do a circle and it'll end up right back on that bed, And I do have a rule in my charters, once we catch that fish is off limits for the rest of the day. We're not, because you could sit there and catch that same fish 4 or 5 times. That's not sporting. We don't do that. We catch it once and we move on to the next one. There's usually plenty around, but that window, because of Lake Erie and the clarity issue that I'm talking about, there's certain years where you don't get hardly any bed fishing at all, whether it's a lot of rain or whether it's a lot of wind. The areas that you really want to be able to go and look for them, you just can't see them in there, and that little window, once it's gone, I mean, the fish get the heck out of there right away. And I'm talking about quality, especially females. And they start moving to the deeper water. And that's when you're going to want to start using a drop shot, which is the most famous presentation for smallmouth, per se. I think it's been around for probably 15, 20 years in popularity with people fishing at hardcore for smallmouth. It used to be tubes before that. I won't even bother throwing a tube nowadays because I don't want to catch a bunch of sheephead. And my experience is throwing tubes around, you're just going to load the boat with sheephead. It just becomes annoying to me at that point. So we go to a drop shot. Okay. Now all my rods are approximately 7 foot. They're usually a medium fast action, and they're very sensitive. I'm not saying you have to have a $250 reel or rod. You don't. $100 rods are what I use on my charter. And most people say these are the most sensitive rods I've ever used. So that's good. But when I'm throwing the reel has 10-pound braid on it. And then I use a little micro swivel instead of tying a knot directly from my braid to my fluorocarbon. And the reason why is because I might have 2 or 3 clients who are fishing, and it's easier for me to pre-tie a whole bunch of leaders like this with the weight, the hook onto a noodle, and I can have 10 or 15 leaders ready to go and just tie it right up to the swivel where it broke off the last time. So it saves me, it's a real small, very small micro swivel, but that helps me get baits back in the water for clients as fast as possible. Now the meat part of this drop shot here, you have 8-pound fluorocarbon. I use Sniper, and then this is a size 1 hook right there. It's a drop shot hook made by Gamakatsu. And then I have on this one, it's about a 12-inch leader. Now, this is what separates me from a lot of people, and it's not anything that's to brag about, but this is what I do different. I tie my drop shot weights with a little clip that you would use for crankbaits. I think you can see that right there. And then connect the weight to that with like a bank sinker. Now, this is just a 3/8 ounce bank sinker. And the reason why is twofold. Number one, with the clip, that keeps my bait another 1/2 inch out of zebra mussels. Okay. So that means my knot is now a 1/2 inch. I said bait, but I meant weight. And now my knot at the top of all that is a little higher out of the zebra mussels. And when you're fishing smallmouth, you're always fishing structure, and everything grabs and wants to cut your line and your leaders. So that's a little trick I use there for less breakoffs on my weight. Now the weights themselves, a drop shot weight is very expensive. I don't know why people pay that kind of money for them, just because it says drop shot on the package. This bank sinker, I think it costs 20 cents a piece or something like that, versus you could pay $1, $2, or if you wanted to buy tungsten, you could pay $3 for something that you could break off on your very first cast. You never know, so save your money, buy your bank sinkers. This is another 3/8 ounce. That seems to be one of my favorite weights for casting those swim baits or on my drop shot. And then the bait I had on this here is a 3.6 inch power bait max scent worm. Okay. Now to get back to your whole scent philosophy, this bait here is designed to sit in front of a fish. And I've had fish where I've seen them on the electronics staring at that bait. And I know it's 10 or 20. I mean, you won't believe me, but I've had them 30 seconds long before they decided to eat that. Well, that max scent, when it first came out, it was like magic to smallmouth, and they were actually biting this. You couldn't even buy this stuff anywhere. It was sold out everywhere. People were selling for $20 a package on eBay because they won every tournament that came out for 4 years when they were on it. Okay. Now I only throw 2 colors of this. They have 10. Okay. I only throw 2 colors. It's black or green pumpkin. I start off with black in the morning when it's very, very dim, or if the water is pretty stained. But if it's clean water or that sun gets up above, I find that usually that green pumpkin gets a few more bites than any other color. And I just try to keep it simple, for bait selection when it comes to that, honestly. And that bait right there is good from the time you tie a drop shot on in May to the time you stop fishing a drop shot in late October or November. You could use that bait all year long. I buy, I don't know, 100 packages of these a year at least, and they're not cheap, but they work.
Interesting. Now, with your weight setup, you said that you kind of focus on 3/8. Why? I mean, I know why you would upsize or downsize, but why do you generally change your weight? And I also wanted to comment the way that you have your drop shot set up. That kind of makes it super easy if conditions change or the wind changes and you got to go a little heavier, a little lighter to just, simply clip a new weight on.
Yeah, it's all about efficiency when you're on a charter, because that person who spent big money has 8 hours on a bass charter. All my walleye charters, almost everybody's 6 hours, but on my bass charters, it's 8 hours because we're running a lot of, like half the time to Canada, and you're running between. I want to make sure you get as much time as possible fishing. So if I can make anything quicker, whether it's switching weights or tying on a new leader, the better. The easier, the better, just to keep them fishing. That's how you keep customers happy. What you were talking about as far as the size goes, what I did notice, Chuck, is that, a ½ ounce would be great to throw around all the time because you can feel things a little better, including the structure and stuff. The problem with a ½ ounce, and we're literally talking only a quarter ounce more than this weight right here, which is 3/8, but a ½ ounce bait, a weight, will allow that fish to get some leverage when it's jumping and shaking its head, and you will lose more fish on a ½ ounce weight. So I try to not use it unless I have a customer who's really struggling to feel things, or if it's really, really windy. But honestly, I'm not one of the cowboy charters, we call them, that go out in almost every condition that you see. And I know you know who I'm talking about because there's a few out there. But I usually fish when the weather, I don't want someone out there puking either. That's a whole nother thing about people making sure they get their money's worth. I try to make sure the conditions are right for that trip.
And it's got to be pretty challenging once it gets, over a certain condition to actually be productive with your presentation.
Yeah, the spot lock has been huge for smallmouth fishermen. Being able to literally put that, and I've been in up to 4-foot waves and then legit Lake Erie 4-foot waves, and put my Minn Kota Ultrex to a test, and that sucker held. Now my circle that is keeping me in probably naturally was a little bigger than if it was perfectly calm, but that to be able to just push a button and stay on that spot and be able to fish and do everything and know your trolling motor is going to keep you on that with the wind and the current and everything is very helpful. It's very helpful. And then what I did this year, actually at the end of last year, I added a turret to my system. And a turret, what that is people have their live scope, which is able to shoot in front of the boat to see fish swimming in front of the boat attached to their trolling motor. Well, if you're on spot lock, your trolling motor is constantly doing this back and forth. Well, then that makes your live scope do that. So you see a fish and then all of a sudden it's out of the cone again. You see a fish. Well, with this turret, it's an additional bar attached to the shaft of the Ultrex that I have a 2-button pad down by my feet that I can turn the turret separate of the Ultrex. So I can scan wherever I want in like about a 270-degree cone around the boat, while my Ultrex head still swinging back and forth, fighting to stay on one spot. So I can literally just follow a fish as it's swimming, saying it's going left, and stay with it if I'm trying to target that one fish per se. So that was a nice, it was expensive. It was like $1,200 for that turret, but it's a really nice little tool for using that live scope for sure.
Yeah, you know, those things, stuff like that pays off in the long run.
Yeah, now I struggle with using the live scope a lot because of my charters. I don't have guys who are skilled usually who can cast in the, you know, if you're using that live scope, they need to cast in about a 3 or 4 foot area to get it down in front of that fish. So I would say probably only 20% of my clients are capable of using that. But I always show it to everybody just because they think it's really cool to be able to see fish swimming around the boat, not just underneath the boat, you know, swimming it out there. They really do like to see that.
It's a great opportunity to teach them something too, you know, especially seeing is believing, right?
Yeah.
I use the fish hawk out there pretty frequently in the same situation, you know, just to kind of help reiterate to the clients that there is a current and you have to focus on, and especially with trolling, you know, your heading and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that your sponsor is Amped Lithium. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
I would recommend anybody who is fishing with the live scope that they dedicate a Amped Lithium battery directly for their electronics, because you will get a better picture on your screen. You will be able to see the fish better, your bait better, if you have one lithium battery that can fully power your electronics all by itself, different from the kicker motor, or different from the motors and the trolling motor and everything else. You'll get a better picture and image, and you'll be able to see what you're doing. If you're fishing with that live scope, definitely go lithium. Stay off the AGM gels, you know, the normal batteries you would use for your boat.
Yeah, I agree, especially with live scope, because, you know, you, like you said, with the trolling motor, you're trying to get that image as stable as possible and as clear as possible, right? So
Yeah.
separating those electrical currents is definitely going to prevent the interference and give you a clearer shot.
Yeah.
Now, do you feel, in your opinion, like live scope obviously isn't a requirement to chase smallmouth, and not everybody has a live scope. You know, it's an angler's tool, so you can't just go buy a live scope and go catch, you know, all the fish and win the tournament. There's definitely a learning curve to it. So what advice would you give for people that don't have live scope on how they would get out there and have a successful day?
It goes back to what I was talking about with all those waypoints that I have, and I've spent days and days and weeks out there just graphing around, marking stuff, using my side imaging, which helps me determine different size of the structure itself. And before that, before I use the side imaging a lot, you're using your sonar. You're using your down sonar that tells you, okay, well, you just went from 20 foot up to 16 foot and then back to 20 foot. Well, obviously, you know, there's some type of rock pile or hump there. And then once I mark the top of that, now I start doing a circle around it. Do I do it? Is it a ridge that extends one way, or did I just cut over a ridge, or is it actually just a rubble rock pile there? You know, and I did that. I did that for hours and hours and hours too, without the help of side scan and without the help of live scope, just marking fit, you know, rock piles and ridges. Ridges on Lake Erie are very common, believe it or not. You know, people don't, they go up and over something and they're like, oh, that was a nice rock pile or hump. Well, guess what? If you would have done circles around that, you would have realized that that rock pile was actually just the spine of a ridge that ran for 500 yards. You know, there's quite a long time that there's quite an amount of time that I'll actually work the top of that ridge the whole way down with my trolling motor, keeping me on top of that. Because if the fish are off to the side or down off of it, they might be chilling. They might be, you know, not interested in feeding as much. But the ones that move up that 4 foot on top of that rocky ridge or rock pile, that's the one that's up there. He's up there for a reason. He wants to eat, you know, so that's how you can target the fish and in the strike zone. That's the dinner plate for them up there.
That makes a lot of sense, and a quick tip to add to that. Even if you don't have side scan, I like to run my sonar and my down scan kind of on a split screen. That way, if you see something on the bottom, you can quickly see on your down scan, is it just a, ball of bait fish? Is it a tree? Is it a hump? And kind of help decipher that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't have to run out and buy a live scope. It definitely, I'll tell you what, in my opinion, if you want to further your angling skills and become a better angler, understand the situations a lot better, live scope's the way to go. But depend on, I don't know, it took me probably a year to actually fully be able to understand and utilize.
I still think I'm learning every time I go out with that thing, being able to read a fish's personality and temperament. One fish, you watch your bait fall on that live scope, and that fish literally just comes right over and crushes it. The next one will swim over to it and then swim away. And just trying to judge what it's going to take to make that fish bite. And the tough thing with live scope on Lake Erie is you don't hardly know what kind of fish you're looking at. Now there's people, and I have seen a few incidences where I can tell that's a sheephead or not. And it's just by the way that fish moved on there. But in general, I would say, a majority of the time you're using an educated guess, but you don't know if it's a sheephead or a walleye or a smallmouth, and it's really hard on Lake Erie because there's such a huge biomass of fish. Versus if you went and fished a reservoir somewhere in Alabama, most of the fish in 10 to 15 feet are either catfish or bass, one of the two, that type. It makes it a little harder to decipher, but, I guess it's one of those experience things, you just learn a little bit more every time. And like you said, in my first year was a huge learning curve using live scope, but it's got better.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that just continues to get better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty soon they're going to come out with another version that's even better than the one now.
Right. One thing that I wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned right now about 8 foot of water is probably approximately where they're hanging out. I'm assuming that would also transition offshore on like a reef or a hump. Like for example, in Breast Bay, they have some humps that they come up 15 foot out of the water, almost looks like a traffic cone. So like in that type of situation, would they still be hanging out around that structure right around
that's going to
8
be
foot of
a
water?
that's going to be a pre and post spawn spot. Most of the beds per se, when they're bedding, is in more of a protected area. Breast Bay, as beautiful it is, and it is gorgeous water there most of the time. And that's for those who don't know, that's the western edge of Lake Erie in Michigan waters. They need a more protected area to feel comfortable in bedding, whether it's in a more of a harbor shelter bay per se, or even marinas or harbor breakwalls. Lorraine and Ashtabula and Presque Isle, they all have big, beautiful harbors, and they will bed inside and outside up against those rocks because they offer a lot of shelter from big waves and current and stuff like that. So anything out in open water, and listen, I'm not saying they don't spawn in open water, because I'm sure they do in some areas, but I know if you gave a smallmouth the option of a protected area versus an open water area, they're going to choose the more protected area.
That makes a lot of sense.
For example,
go ahead.
Real quick. For example, north of Kelly's, right? It's a big area north of Kelly. North Kelly's Bay is a big area, but it's still protected from most winds because of the way the points stick out. And unless it's a dead north wind coming in there or northeast wind, it's a fairly protected area. It has the right sediment bottom and stuff like that. And when the water's perfect and everything, there's plenty of fish that'll bed up in there versus the east or the west side or the south side of Kelly's. That's why they would more choose the north side of Kelly's.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because that's probably the least possible direction that the wind and waves is going to affect their young.
Well, the most common wind we have is a southwest wind, although this year it might be different. But that southwest wind is usually the strongest of the winds. We will get a heavy northeast wind, of course we will, but for them when they move up, it's usually because the barometer's right, the moon's right. So all the conditions will fit a protected area, and north of Kelly's is more protected than any of the other sides per se.
Right. We do have a couple of questions. I apologize. I know one of them's been sitting for a while. What do we got, Phil? Oh, U.S. Kayak Fishing Magazine asked, do you scope on your charters? I think you already explained that.
Depending on the angler's ability. If they want to scope, we'll scope all day long. But I would say 80% of mine don't include scope just because it's a little bit tougher per se to cast in the right areas at the right time. And a lot of times then I'll park my boat off of the rock pile directly upwind of it so they can cast directly downwind at the rock pile we're fishing. Or I do, in some areas, I do a lot of drift fishing actually. I'll line myself up with the way the wind's going to blow and to drift over a piece of structure if it's a big enough piece of structure.
That makes a lot of sense. I might have to try to implement that because that's one of the biggest challenges for me is if it's not completely flat out there, I'm only on the spot for a handful of minutes and I haven't added a, bow mount with spot lock.
Yeah, well, the key to that then would be to find one of those ridges that I was talking about where you can line yourself up with the wind to go, with the wind along the top of that ridge, give or take. And that'd be one possibility. Or a big flat that has a huge amount of, random big boulders where you could drift over. I can think of 3 different areas now that you could drift for 300 yards and be in a strike zone the whole time just because of the bottom content there. It goes up from 8, 12, 14 back and forth just with the big boulders and stuff. That's another good area to do.
That's a good point. U.S. Kayak Fishing Magazine also wants to know how much is an average charter to go out and catch fish with you?
So walleye charters are $500. They're 6-hour trips. I provide all the gear and everything. And a bass trip is 8 hours, 2 hours more, and it's $600. So it's only $100 more. And I basically eat up all that difference in gas, to be honest with you. As I said earlier, half the time I'm running up to Canada when the season opens up there, the 4th Saturday of every June. From then, as long as the weather lets me, I run most of my trips up there just to get away from the pressure and the constant trolling that goes on around the islands. That's why I run up there. But for this time of year and until that opens is American waters, but it's an 8-hour trip for $600. And that can be up to 3 guys. I usually tell people, I prefer 2 just so we can stay on the structure per se and have people cast in at the exact same spot and not get tangles. But we can do 3, especially if you're casting swim baits. There's plenty of room for guys to cast 3 swim baits. And I can make it work.
Right. And, while we're at it, how do people find you and how do they find out how to book a charter?
I do have a website, shoemakeroutdoors.com. And it has all my information there. You can book right there on the website. It'll give you some videos that I used to make back in the day. Or you could always email me. eriepro@yahoo.com, ERIEPRO@yahoo.com. And I'll put my phone number out there because I'm not afraid of telemarketers. It's 440-396-0365.
Awesome. Look, if you're trying to, you're looking to come to Lake Erie, or maybe you moved to the area, or you've never fished for smallmouth, or you're just looking to further your skills, definitely head over to his website, give Johnathan a call, and book your trip. Get out there and have the time of your life.
Yeah, I can promise you, I can promise anybody who does come with me that we're going to have a lot of fun and a lot of laughs. And, you know, there's a lot of joking that happens on my boat. So if that's the type of person you like to hang around with, I'm your guy.
Awesome. You know, that's there's a couple of things that makes a good charter captain, right? Number one, you got to be able to catch fish, and number two, you got to be personable and fun to be around and enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was gonna ask, I know we're not really at the point where they're on the reefs yet, and you know, that offshore structure. Can you walk us through like how, or I guess we should start, can you walk us through how you would begin to pick apart those spawning grounds, or like the 8 foot of water near shore, as well as like the big reefs?
Well, the spawning grounds, as I was saying earlier, is usually protected areas. You know, if I can look on the map and say it's protected from every wind but this wind, you know, that's usually a good area to target. But you want substrate that has sand also. That's about the only time of the year that I'm actually looking for sand, because they want a sandy base around their nest, and then they want to spawn either up against a big rock that they can fan down into the rock base, or, and there's a few areas that I know that they'll use actual logs and stuff to spawn right up against the logs too. They like to have something protecting one direction. I don't know why that is, but I've seen it over and over again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what's a common mistake that instantly drops your odds of landing a trophy smallmouth?
Too heavy of a line. Most people use too heavy of a line, too big of a hook. My mentor in this, his name was Brian Coates. He was a legend tournament fisherman back in the day on Lake Erie in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, he taught me most things that I know, and I was blessed to have him as a mentor. You know, he used a hook size smaller than even the number one that I'm using there on that drop shot. He used a size 2, and that's a very, very small hook. And with the clear water, you know, once you get out of spring, Lake Erie is a fairly clean body of water, and 8 pound versus 10 pounds will get you a lot more bites in just one day. It's amazing the difference between 8 pound and 10 pound fluorocarbon, or a hook that's a little bigger than another hook. The fish in Lake Erie, Western Basin, have seen it all. They've played that game since ice is out. They've had bandit crankbaits and husky jerks and everything zipping by their head, and then they go to the spawning grounds, and they got boat after boat sitting right over top of them. And then after that, they're on every reef, and there's not a place that they don't get fish for. And, you know, they've seen it all. So the more natural presentation, the lighter line, the lighter hook will definitely get you more bites in Lake Erie. No doubt about it.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. My questions are a mess. I know we covered a lot of them. Did you want to kind of continue, pick up where you left off with your explanation of this time of year targeting them, and was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I think I covered most of it, honestly. I pretty much covered everything I would do for the next month or so, you know. Pre-spawn now, give it 2 weeks near the full moon. Go looking for some beds if the water's clear. And then by the end of May, you're going to be right outside those areas looking for reefs, rocks, and catching them on their way back to the deeper waters.
Right. It wouldn't be right if we didn't touch on safety, So I did want to ask you, crap, there. Two things. Obviously, the water temperature is still below 60 degrees right now. Historically, Lake Erie generally gets above 60. I think it's around May 15th. Lately, the last handful of years, it's fluctuated, maybe a week before or 2 weeks after. But obviously, cold water is very dangerous. What would you recommend to people looking to get out and fish for smallmouth now, whether they're, on a kayak or on a boat, just to consider and prepare for, since it is still cold water season?
Well, I mean, I always tell people in the text I send them the day before their charter is to dress really warm in the morning where you're almost going to be sweating, and then we can take layers off from there, and there's nothing wrong with having a pile of coats at the bottom of your boat that then, around noon, because everybody would strip down. But I'd rather have a client who's focused on fishing and warm than someone who's sitting there shaking and cold because they didn't realize how cold it was going to be out there. Because as well as I don't care what the temperature in the spring is on land. It's always almost whatever the temperature of the water is out there. If the water temperature is 55 degrees right now, it's got to get pretty darn hot to feel more than 55 degrees on that water, especially if the wind's blowing, so just dress warm to start for the day. Make sure if you are in a kayak, you always have a PFD, right? Personal flotation device on. And, just make sure I did fish out there. I know you're a huge kayaker. What was it? Last weekend out of Lorraine, there was a guy out there and he didn't have a flag on the back of his kayak. And I don't know, is that a requirement that you have to have a flag on the back of your kayak?
Unfortunately, when it comes to human-powered kayaks on Lake Erie, the requirements are very, very lenient. And I think some of it is, the people writing these laws, number one, they don't do it, so they don't really know, right? And number two, I don't know, I like to think maybe they don't try to force too many unnecessary laws, but that is one that should be some kind of high visibility flag. And I would also even take it further and just require the PFD to be worn, because, I was thinking the other day, I can't think of one situation, well, except for the one that I just thought about now, but where somebody didn't have their PFD on and was able to get back to their vessel, put their PFD on, and save their life. And the one situation that just popped into my head, and you're familiar with, is the gentleman that survived 11 hours offshore on Lake Erie, clinging to a 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was he should have gone and played the lottery the next day, because that's about as lucky as you can get.
I agree. The water wasn't super cold, but it was cold enough to lower your body temperature over that course of time and quickly take your life. So just wear that PFD. If you're on a boat, maybe when you're underway, throw the PFD on. You always want to try to think safety, especially when you're fishing by yourself, because, within the blink of an eye, you're overboard and you can't get back to your vessel and there's nobody on there to help you, right? So,
yeah.
And we'll just leave it at that. We won't beat the dead horse. So what do you hope people take away from tonight's episode?
They want to book me for a charter because they want to go catch big smallmouth or walleye, let's be honest. But I mean, we've pretty much focused on smallmouth. So I hope that I put off enough of impression on people that they want to go and have a fun day with me, and No, I usually ask people what's the biggest smallmouth you've caught for the day, just so I know what kind of standards we're having, And what's quite funny is that the first time someone catches a 3.5 pound smallmouth on Lake Erie, oh my goodness, that must be 5 pounds, and no, it's 3.5 pounds. But if you caught that in a river down by Cincinnati per se, you're going to tell everybody that sucker was 5 pounds. Well, really, in general, that fish right there was about 3.5 pounds. That one was over 4 there. But the way I tell people, those are little guys there. But a Lake Erie smallmouth, because it's just built just so much muscle on them things, and they're so wide. They don't have to be super long to be heavy, And a 3.5 pound smallmouth is a trophy in most average people's eyes, to be honest with you. For me personally, anything over 4 is definitely a solid fish. I mean, you can't be unhappy with that fish. But most people, if they catch a 3.5 pound fish, they think they just caught, and they probably did just catch their largest smallmouth ever. A 5 pounder is not a common fish. I probably caught, I don't know, 25 of them on charters last year per se. And then we usually pop 2 or 3 6-pounders a year, But most people, when they land a 4.5 pound smallmouth, they'll tell you for a fact it's the biggest smallmouth they've ever seen. And that's probably true.
Right.
So,
by the way,
me.
what is
what you want to do? Book me.
What is your personal best?
6 1/4, basically. I want to say it was like 6'3" something. I've actually had 2 clients catch fish that bigger than I've ever caught personally. And I've had multiple 6s, but they've all been just below that. I can't get to a 7-pounder yet. I don't know. They're not very common out there. That's for sure.
Well, and you're too focused on getting everybody else their personal best.
Well, I got about 3 fun fishing days last year. That's about it. That's another thing about charter fishing is, I was on the water 75 times last year, and I think I got 3 of those 75 days for fun fishing. The rest was to help someone else catch their big fish.
Right. I did see a question pop up. I think it was, is it catch and release only?
On my boat, it is. Smallmouth are my babies. I treat them as well as possible, take pictures, thank them, and then put them back in and let them swim away. Honestly, as I said earlier, the western basin of Lake Erie is they're called the Bass Islands for a reason, because there used to be a million freaking smallmouth around those islands. Well, with the invention of trolling for walleye around the year 2000 or so, give or take, I'm not going to argue when it was, but it was somewhere around there. These fish get beat on by crankbaits anywhere near shore, and it's just tough being a smallmouth now. You got gobies eating eggs off of beds. You got cormorant population. The population now is probably 20-25% of what it was once back in the day. So I try to keep them for pictures and put them back in. If you want to eat a smallmouth, go hire a big white boat, or go try to catch them yourself, and don't tell me about it, because I'll be mad at you.
I agree. I mean, on Lake Erie, you have walleye, you have yellow perch, you have steelhead. There's plenty of other species to eat that are probably much better table fare, depending on who you ask. The smallmouth, they're just super beautiful, and because we're the walleye capital of the world and walleye are pretty much taken over, we have to look after these species that are affected by the different changes and the trend of the fishery, I guess. And one thing I wanted to do was get back to the importance of booking a trip with you. It doesn't matter what your skill level is, and there's a lot of important things that we talked about on this podcast. But the number one way to rapidly speed up your learning curve is to hire a guide. And, there's nobody out there that's going to give you a better experience and a better adventure for Lake Erie Smallmouth than Johnathan Shoemaker. So definitely get your buddies together, make it a point to get a trip. There's only so many good days on Lake Erie, so you definitely don't want to hesitate or waste. So reach out to Johnathan Shoemaker to book that. I'll try to go back and get your phone number and drop that in the description as well as your website. That way it's really easy for you guys to get a hold of them.
Thanks. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. And one last thing before we let you off the hook, we're going to reel you back in for one last piece of angler's wisdom. But don't worry, it's a catch and release kind of question. If you had to choose just one or two key pieces of angler's wisdom, whether something you've learned through experience or a valuable lesson that was passed down to you, what would they be, and why do you think they're so important for others to hear?
I would say you can't beat time on the water. And nowadays, in today's society, everybody wants to be keyboard warriors and, where did you catch that fish and how did you catch it? And yeah, that can lead you to a pack of boats that are catching fish. But in general, you can't beat time on the water and your own experiences out there learning new techniques. Don't be afraid to try something different. And, that's where you build your confidence and your experience, and that makes you a better fisherman.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. It's that time and experience, just like we were talking about with the live scope, where some people can make a pretty good educated guess as to what species it is. You spend enough time doing something, you're going to naturally gain those skills. Just like with me with Lake Erie weather and, kayak fishing offshore, miles offshore, it's, invest that time. And even if you don't come back with monster fish, you're going to come back with a whole big bag of some angler's wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely.
And before we go, I wanted to bounce back. You were talking about how important it is to, take a picture of that fish or measure it or whatever you want to do very quickly and let it get back down to the nest. We didn't really get into the gobies, but when you pull a smallmouth off a nest like that, those gobies are sitting and waiting, and they instantly come in, they start eating all those smallmouth eggs. So the amount of time that smallmouth is away from the nest is very, very important to, the sustainability of that particular nest. And if you repetitively catch that fish, I mean, there's going to be a point where there's no eggs left on the nest for the goby to eat, right? So we just want to always remember to just be the best steward to our resource and our passion as we can, and make sure we leave it better for the future generation.
Agreed. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, Johnathan. And I'm hoping I got to figure out some time to get out with you this year as well.
Let me know, buddy. I'll open the day up for you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, brother. Enjoy the rest of your night. And everybody that's watching at home, this week, because of technical difficulties and scheduling, I just kind of, you roll with the punches, right? So we do have another episode of the Angler's Wisdom podcast tomorrow night at our usual time, Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're bringing on the inventor of Strike Assist, which is a pretty unique product that has been proven to increase the catch ratio on Lake Erie and on the Great Lakes for walleye, salmon, steelhead when you're trolling. So we're bringing on Calvin Vanderboon, the founder of Strike Assist, and we're going to break that down. I'm going to share my personal experience. I've been running it for maybe a year and a half now. I know Pete Quest in the Eastern Basin over by Erie, PA, has been running it for longer than I have. So we're just going to kind of break down the concept and go through all that stuff, provide some extra tips to make sure that you have more fish in your boat. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. We'll see you next Thursday on the Angler's Wisdom Podcast. Thank you for joining us today on the Angler's Wisdom Podcast. We hope you got some good insight out of the show and learned something new. Don't forget to go over to ampedoutdoors.com and support the title sponsor of the show. Follow them on social media and just show them some love. And lastly, head over to LakeErieKayakFishing.com and check out all the many resources as well as opportunities to book an unforgettable Lake Erie kayak fishing adventure with yours truly. You can also get yourself a Lake Erie kayak fishing gift card to the obsessed angler in your life. And remember, fishing is life, but safety comes first. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next Thursday live on the Angler's Wisdom Podcast.
Oh, yeah! Yeah!
Oh! Oh, it's a nice one.
Yeah!